This is a on the spot episode of Shine Like You Penny podcast. For those actually watching this, I don't have makeup on because I figured one, it was on the spot, and two, I figured that's the best way to do this video given the content. For context, I have been concerned about some of the feedback I have seen in different communities, particularly related to autistic creators. I do want to say that everyone is different and everyone has a right to have their content look like the way they want to, sound the way they want to. There can be different standards. I also understand that there's a lot of pressure for us to be perfect or near perfect. While a lot of us already are struggling with perfectionism, there's also concerns that the algorithm or that what the audience may prefer, or you, the viewers, could be closer to neurotypical standards more than we would like. I have noticed a trend. It could be coincidental. And I have a lot of respect for the different autistic content creators out there. I really, really do. However, I notice, and there could be exceptions, but I have noticed some particular speech patterns among those that tend to get more views and more shares and have more followers. And I could be way off, but they seem to emulate something that could be considered more neuronormative. And now, I'm not saying that's something anyone is doing intentionally. It could just be happening. For all I know, they do lots of takes. I don't know. Maybe they have outlines or pre-scripts, or they just got, perhaps they got blessed with certain ways of certain autistic traits versus others, and they may have less co-occurring disabilities. That is very possible, or maybe they're pro-actors. Who knows? I don't want to make assumptions. However, as I was making some of my content, and by that I mean some of the more organic content, more casual conversations, especially conversations I've had with other people, I had to fight the urge, and it's still there, to make it seem more polished. However, when I did release it in a less polished state, I felt like the feedback I was given had more to do with what I considered to be neuronormative standards. This is serious on multiple levels. So again, you have a right as a viewer to like what you like. However, there's a reason why I think you should care. And that is the amount of autistic people that have co-occurring speech disabilities. And that number is hard to find, to be exact, but estimates suggest from research that between 20% to 65% of autistic children may also have speech apraxia. And this overlap is especially noted between autistic individuals who are non-speaking or unreliably speaking. And non-speaking doesn't necessarily mean not talking at all, just so you know. But these figures can vary. Diagnosis often requires specialized assessment, especially assessment to distinguish between different speech and language disorders. And it can have a lot of overlap with autism in itself, with how it can manifest, because there can be differences in speech and delivery presentation with someone being autistic. When I had my speech evaluations as an adult, once we already knew I was autistic, it did impact whether they considered if I had, let's say, cluttering of speech. I have found conflicting information on if cluttering of the speech could occur more in autistic individuals. It's thought to occur more in ADHD individuals, or they might exhibit patterns of cluttering. I am an ADHDer myself. Now, I point this out because cluttering is a disfluency disorder, so it could affect the fluency of speech. However, I do consider it to be a neurodivergent condition, which I consider to be both a disability and a difference. Cluttering can impact how someone sounds, and the more relaxed someone sounds, sometimes cluttering may actually be amplified. Some of my most casual conversations with my friends, I may sound the most disfluent. That's not always the case, but it has happened. I also can be really confident about something, and I might have cases of filler words, or maybe my inflection or my tone of voice doesn't come out the way that shows how I'm feeling inside, or it does not demonstrate the depth of my knowledge if you go strictly by my tone versus my content. And I have talked to other autistic people who feel very, very similarly to this. Speech apraxia, again, is very common, or thought to be common in autistic individuals. I don't hear it talked about nearly enough in the autism community. My speech therapist has said that speech apraxia could explain sometimes more filler words, even though it's not normally thought about that. It's also important to note that it's kind of a brain messaging with how things come out, as well as motor control. However, it can vary, like my articulation may vary. I may accidentally put different enunciation. I may put more emphasis on one syllable versus another. And things can also sound kind of mushed together. And it could affect articulation as well. Now, being an autistic ADHDer, this can also affect my gestures. I've also been told I don't gesture enough, or gesture too much, or maybe I've also been told it's kind of uncanny valley at times, like slightly off. It can also affect my tone of voice, my rate. I point this out because I think it's really important to consider the content that we're listening to, and the content, a representation that is available on media. I understand that there's a reason why people may prefer certain content over other content. So I'm not going to lie, some speech disabilities can impact the delivery style. It may be slightly harder to listen to, and I understand when someone's autistic and they may also have co-occurring auditory processing challenges, or even, I know it's controversial, but even auditory processing disorder like myself, it could be very, very challenging. However, I think it's important for multiple reasons. One, normalization. I think seeing more authentic representation, and I'm not saying people aren't being authentic. I'm just saying I have noticed that I there are probably exceptions, but I have noticed that more disfluent YouTubers that are autistic may have less viewers and less followers and less likes compared to those that may appear more neurotypical. It could be completely coincidental, but I cannot completely explain it by quality of content or knowledge when I have looked at different content creators. I did not feel like it fully explained it. I did not think it had to do with the level of engaging content or the knowledge. I thought it had more to do with delivery style. There could be something else for all I know. Maybe people, I don't make accusations. It could have to do with ads. I don't know. However, I think representation matters for normalization of certain autistic and other neurodivergent traits. I think it's important to normalize things like speech disabilities as well. I think it's when we see these differences and we get used to them, it can help increase acceptance. I have talked to different people with different speech disabilities, and a lot of people just do not feel like they can be themselves. And they also feel judged. I think that's important to foster acceptance, to increase representation. That's why I am creating this video unscripted for this content. I think it's very important. Again, I do think creators should be able to have what they want their content to look like. However, I would also love to see more autistic creators that have speech apraxia and cluttering speech disorders. And I think it would be really helpful to see more of that as well. I'd also, again, love to see more non-speaking autistic content creators. I think when speech differences in delivery style are normalized, it can reduce stigma, it can reduce misconceptions, and it can foster acceptance. People might be more willing to listen to the content and to the message when we normalize these differences in speech patterns and delivery styles. That could go a long way for someone at school, whether that's in higher education or younger school. It can also, I also think we can be, I don't want to say everyone is a role model, but I think obviously we didn't have content creation the same way when I was growing up. But if I had had more role models because my speech disabilities were even more noticeable back then, I don't think that's very apparent in this conversation. However, it can definitely be seen in some of the more casual, in some of my other conversations with particularly with other people, since having a conversation with someone else seems to be a factor that can impact it for me for whatever reason. I think it could have been a game changer when I was younger, for sure. Two, this kind of goes with number one, but I think it could actually help a little bit with employment review. Let me explain. So I do think we need more changes for the job interview process. I think it's flawed. I think we need alternatives to it, which I've talked about and will talk about again. And that's not what this video is about. However, I believe that when we normalize certain behaviors or ways of speaking or differences of being, employers could increase their awareness. So I know there's a lot of tendency, and a lot of it's unintentional, to unintentionally discriminate against people who may sound different. And a lot of our differences could come off as unsure, even when we are confident, or we could come off as being colder. I have heard from different individuals that are autistic that they weren't given certain leadership roles in employment because they were told that they came off as being unsure, even though they were very sure of themselves. So I've also talked about, not on the channel, but I have talked before about how confidence may actually look different in autistic individuals. And I think it could look different in other type of neurodivergent individuals as well. There are times where I have been very, very sure of what I said, and I was told that I came off as unsure. This has happened. And I've heard other people identify with this. So I think showing more types of representation could be helpful for employment for those reasons. 3, minimizing autistic burnout. Again, everyone is different. And I'm not saying everyone who has a more polished way, because I realize I ironically made this video and my disfluencies aren't coming off across as much as I thought they might. However, I feel like it's important to state that for some people and for myself, depending on what I'm going through or the nature of the content, I might be masking for it to come off a certain way. I'm not masking in this moment, but I do think the way I'm speaking, my message is able to come across more than it has during other times where I'm completely meaning what I'm saying. So even though this is something that I did not plan at all, which all my content, I usually think ahead what I want to talk about. This, I just knew the general topic and that was it. And it was more just on the spot. I was passionate, so I wanted to talk about it. But autistic burnout is a #1 risk factor for suicidal ideation and suicide, and masking is a major risk factor for autistic burnout. And autistic burnout is pretty much when your energy or your ability to so your battery basically runs out. I don't know how to say it. So it's kind of like work burnout, but it can affect every aspect of your life and it can go on for years. And I don't want to dedicate this whole video to explaining autistic burnout, but it can be when it is typically when the demands of life exceed your ability or your supports. And it's usually from a lack of societal supports and accommodations and understanding, as well as negative attitudes from society. So there are times where I just wanted to be able to make casual content, but I was concerned about how I came across. And I don't saying that when I'm saying that, I want to be careful because I don't think there's anything. I personally like different ways of talking. And I think I have fought so hard to be able to be me. But I think anyone should be able to make the content they want to make, as long as it's not intentionally trying to hurt someone else or spreading misinformation on purpose or anything like that. You know what I mean? But I feel like if the content, I feel like if there was more forgiveness for certain ways of speaking, I would probably feel a lot better. I have had a tendency to get, it's usually private, but I have gotten a lot of feedback and I'm growing a thicker skin. So I know that is part of it. But I also I know that the bias is still there and it's something that is close to my heart. So the bias is still there for a lot of people. And I've also had speech language pathologists tell me when I brought this up that they do think there is something about which autistic creators or public speakers are able to go further. And they did agree it had to do with those that are coming off as more neurotypical. For instance, I think, I know she can be kind of controversial, but some of Temple Grandin's speeches and presentations I have liked. I don't always agree with everything she says. However, I didn't really pick up on her unusual delivery style, but my speech language pathologist commented on it. So had some other professionals, and they point out that might have held her back. And I'm not saying that's the case. I do know Temple Grandin has a lot of other interests, and I couldn't say she's didn't go far in her career. I feel like that would be grossly understating her accomplishments, including what she's done for other industries. My point is, sometimes it can be disheartening, both as a public speaker and as a content creator, when I'm just going on the internet and the autistic creators that I see getting the most views are these people that are having very high quality. So I understand it and I get that we do want to reward quality. At the same time, I also think we want to reward content that may look different, that's still high quality, but it may be look a different way. Hypocritical statement real quick. I am working on my camera situation. I just realized that could come off as a little hypocritical. However, I think I've been on my tangent for, not a tangent, but I've spoken for about 20 minutes. So I'm going to wrap this up. I would like to see autistic creators that have different disabilities showcase more. And I'm also going to be more mindful myself who I'm clicking on and who I'm listening to. So I do have several content creators I follow, and some of them do have very clear speech disabilities, and they have said that they have those. Some of them have cerebral palsy as well, or other disabilities. So I do believe I have been following different creators, and I also have collaborated with at least one non-speaking autistic individual before. And I've tried to make an effort to speak or to reach out to more. But so anyways, I do want to leave you with this note. Next time when you are watching a content creator, in particular, if you know they're autistic or some type of neurodivergent, and you just feel turned off for whatever reason by their delivery style, I know it's super hard, and I'm not saying you have to do this, but just consider pausing and trying to see if you can look past that delivery style and focus on their content. For other content creators, I'm not telling you what to do, but again, maybe sometimes with the perfect polished videos, not that anything's perfect, but you know what I mean? Maybe consider putting more content out there that actually shows a filler word sometimes, or shows some disfluencies, or different ways of gesturing, or different facial expressions, or different tone of voice. It's just a thought. Anyways, thank you for listening. And my monologue, Larissa, out.